So welcome, Damian. Thanks for agreeing for coming on the show.
Thanks, Anton. Yeah.
I thought when we maybe start with, if you just tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'll maybe go into your kind of area of research. Because I remember reading your dissertation type thing anyway, so kind of a bit of that. And then I got a couple of topical questions, and then we could take those two questions that was in the thread that people wanted answering. If that's all right.
Okay. So my background. So I've got dual nationality. I was born in England. My mom's a Londoner. Her parents were. My father, he's American. He was in the military, and so I was born in Oxfordshire. Then at pretty young age, my dad got stationed back at the U.S. So then I grew up in the South in Florida. I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and I did not grow up in a religious home or anything like that. Just in case people will think, well, that's these are certain things that you were taught. I didn't grow up religious. As a matter of fact, kind of the opposite. But I've got a degree in history. I got my bachelor's in history. I was a school teacher for a few years, and then I changed career paths and I became a pastor. Most people would know that.
How does that happen?
I'm still questioning that myself too. But I'll tell you, really, the thing that burdened me, it was just the amount of churches that closed down in the UK, and it's just shrinking and shrinking, and so that just kind of broke my heart. And so we've been here, and I'm now in Manchester, and I've recently gotten my master's degree in history from Manchester Metropolitan University.
Yeah, same as mine.
Yeah.
Hoorah!
Go Man U.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've really focused on many of the religious aspects of history, just kind of exploring them. I do like really looking at maybe the opposite view of what many people find popular. I think that's good to stretch our minds. I know I actually got my bachelor's degree from a highly respected but a small conservative university in America, and they considered me a raving liberal.
Oh,
and
the worst thing to be.
and so because I would take different sides, and I would try to think of different things, and then at many people here think I'm a right wing nut. Nut is probably correct, but maybe right wing I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think it just happens to be where you're placed as well, doesn't it? Like you are kind of like defined by the groups that aren't you. So often.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. So that's kind of why I wanted to ask you, because like you have such an unusual kind of like sort of perspective on how you see things. I thought you'd have some quite cool views on it anyway. But
okay.
So maybe you should talk a bit about your like area of like research then, because like I read your dissertation, I thought it was really cool. So
thank you. So my dissertation was that the because of the perception of Catholicism during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, that the anti-Catholic laws, and I wouldn't quite go right to persecution, but I could see why some people would, but why those restrictions were quite reasonable, that they weren't outrageous. And I used Mary Queen of Scots as my case study of how really that there were so many things coming from Rome, really not from a religious point, though it was your soul, your eternity was based upon what you would do, how you would act. But if you think of the papacy back then, it was just as political, if not more, than religious.
And why would you say that was the case?
Well, number one, the Pope had a standing army.
Mm.
That's what I'm not allowed to have one of those at my church. I've asked, I've asked, I've had a church vote. They just no, they won't allow it.
Unbelievable, man. Liberals, man.
But when the Pope celebrates and controls, the Huguenots, when he calls for the monarchy of England to be cast down because she's a heretic, it then leaves the realms of religion and then goes to the idea that he is a kingmaker. He is controlling all those things. And sadly, I think that's really what happened to an aspect of Christianity in like about the 600s, when the Roman Empire really made Christianity the almost a ministry of the state. And so then you slowly began to have people that got in positions, religious positions, that were not there for their love of God, but was there as a political position. And you find that in the Western Roman Empire as well as the Eastern Roman Empire. And then when the empire fell, they kind of kept those controls. I'm not saying it was some dastardly plan. I just think that's the real reason why we've got to be very, very careful about mixing religion and the state. That the state can't control religion, because then instead of going by your conscience of what you believe the Bible has to say, then what you begin to do is you begin to go by the political pressures of the world.
Yeah, I must admit, I've always favoured that separation of church and state.
Yeah,
it seems quite reasonable, and like in many ways, it actually favours kind of like religious tolerance anyway, because obviously you're free to express whatever views you want without without the domineering faction of whatever that group is saying, oh no, we want you to pray this way or that way. It actually makes more sense, doesn't it?
Well, sure. I think one of the greatest evangelical positions, because you hear that term, one of the greatest evangelical positions is, I desperately want you to know Christ. I desperately want you to know the truth, and I will stand. I'll wave my arm. I'll speak till I'm blue in the face, but I can't force you. It's got to be your decision, and that's a decision that you have to deal with. It's kind of like if somebody came up with a cure for the coronavirus now and they kept it to themselves, we would say, boy, that's really selfish. And so that's kind of the Christian idea of, hey, we understand what eternity is, and it's not that we want to shove our religion down your throat, but we desperately want you to be able to have the same thing that we have, but in the end, it's your choice.
Okay. So I kind of wanted to, because obviously, because you have like a dual, well, not only like nationality, but in terms of like your cultures as well, right? So it's kind of
right, exactly.
So that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you about like race as well, and you come from the South, so like race is like an area that is always kind of like, well, it's not one of my obsessions, but it's definitely one of my areas of avid interest. Just because it's such a like a sort of like insane way to like separate people. When you think about how much of like a, well, it's not a real thing really, other than like a social construct, really, isn't it? But the way it like stratifies populations is just it's insane. So America is a particularly interesting example, just because it's because I was trying to make the comparison between like America and here, how like the UK were kind of almost as obsessed with class still, really.
Yeah.
And anyone that says that isn't, it generally just means that they're upper class, and they haven't realised that if you're working class,
right,
it still matters. Like you still go into certain social situations and immediately self-identify with your class. So it seems to me that America is kind of that way still, but towards race. So I was just gonna, I was just gonna ask you, like, why do you think America is so affected by race more so than other countries? Do you think?
Well, number one, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I think there's a lot of understanding. Okay, so
Controversial, I like that.
just to be fully transparent, I have a daughter who's of mixed race. Of course, black isn't a race. Black is a skin color. But she would be considered mixed race, and she's my baby girl. But that doesn't mean we can't have wrong ideas or anything based upon that. I think when we look about race in America, I think the very initial thing that people go to is they think of the United States Civil War, they think of slavery, they think of people that were bound by race accordingly, and then it moves down to where there were strongholds in the South, where the Ku Klux Klan and other racial groups began to go up. And then today you see some videos of when sometimes a police officer beating or killing.
Quite a few of their members,
Yeah.
Early on were police members, weren't they? Back in the day.
So when you look at that, there's questions. I think there's a lot of interesting statistics that are out there, but one of the problems of trying to talk honestly about it is people will, if you give a fact that you don't like, they naturally assume you're doing it because you are a racist, and you'll hear people say you're a racist. If you look at how many people in the United States commit crime, well, first of all, if you look at how many, the disproportion of the black population versus white population, and even Latino population that's in the United States prison system, it is way out of proportion. And then you have to ask why. Today people are supposed to be all equal under the law, and so then the question then becomes, are they? I've read a few interesting statistics that that disproportionately crime is done by the African American group. Now, of course, not every African American at all. A minor part, but disproportion to the amount of crime. And then you have to ask yourself, why is that? Okay, we can say that. Is that because we just believe that somebody is bad because of their genetics, because of their race, and that makes them do crime? I think that is a very simpleton idea. It's foolish. But then you have to look at underlying issues. And right now, there's a lot of questions that are being asked, and the people that are asking them are being shouted down. One of them is you've heard of what's it? My white male privilege.
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of things to be asked about that. At least in the United States, a white male can't apply for a majority, well, maybe not majority, but a good percentage of grants and scholarships that are available, because they're only available to people of a lower lower test scores if they're in a certain minority, and or a certain gender group. Now, look, for me to say that, people will say, how dare you? What are you saying? Look, I'm just saying, let's look at the facts, and then we'll sort that out. I personally would like to say, if somebody doesn't like somebody because of their color, they're absolutely a fool. I mean, they're wicked. I mean, and I really hold to that. I remember when I first came to England, Somebody, not when I first came to England, it was about maybe 5 years later on. Somebody said, well, we've got a president. There's only one problem with him. I said, what? And they said, well, he's just the wrong color. And this was actually by another American here. And they just know me, and they felt comfortable saying that to me. And all I did is say, hey, let me show you a
reason
picture.
with that, isn't it?
Yeah. And so I showed them a picture of my daughter. And they're like, oh, no, I'm not racist or anything like that. I go, well, actually, what you did was pretty racist. And so it's a very complex question. You know, I'm from the South, and religious, and most of the churches that I've been involved in, we are heavily interracial. If my church here in England, you know, somebody joked around that that we almost have a African church. You know, we've got all sorts of nationalities, and I love it. So yeah, there's some issues there, and I also think some people make money, some people keep in positions of power, some people get a lot accomplished for themselves by keeping the race baiting, keeping the problem alive, when it's really, I won't say it's not there, because of course it's there, but it's here too. I mean, our racial issues in this country tend not to be white and black, but they tend to be English, Asian. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, when I first got here, used the term, and I'm just going to say it, and it's highly offensive, but I didn't know what it was. They kept on talking about Packies.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what it was. And then when I found out what it was, I'm like, you know, for all the stigma that America gets, there's still plenty of that here. And I think that can be almost anywhere.
Yeah, I think there's maybe some interesting sort of caveats. On the one side, there's like that difference between like explicit and like implicit racism, isn't there? So like, is that, you know,
Sure.
I'm intentionally saying this, you know, negative term, you know, intentionally to offend that individual, and then it's kind of like, you know,
Right.
everyone's got that uncle who's using that word that they shouldn't use, but it's not to be offensive. They're in a sense kind of like a product of that time, or you know, their consciousness hasn't been maybe risen as far as the surrounding population.
Okay.
Which I do tend to differentiate. I mean, both are wrong, but you know, not to the, you know, like the same level of degree.
Right. It doesn't excuse one. You're just stating why.
Yeah, and there's, I suppose, you can have kind of like, I think like the American examples, like kind of what you're mentioning, they're like institutional almost, whereas I think it undoubtedly still exists here, but it's because like obviously we have, I would argue, a lot more laws to like prevent that kind of thing. It's kind of gone a bit more underground, so like they can't.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Let me actually tell you a story. This is one of the clearest stories I have as a child, and this was in 1980, and that's a long time before you were born.
6 years.
But yeah, 6 years, is that it?
Yeah, I'm old.
Oh yeah, 86. Yeah. My daughter's 88. So yeah, so it's not too far, but Ronald Reagan was running for president, and I would have been 9 years old at the time. And my teacher asked the class who if they could vote, who would they vote for? And actually, everyone in the classroom, because the teacher really highly respected Jimmy Carter, said they would vote for Jimmy Carter. And the teacher noticed I didn't raise my hand, and she said to me, who would you vote for? And I said, Ronald Reagan. I didn't know anything about Ronald Reagan. I just knew that that was the politician my mom liked. Well, my teacher said to me, she said, why would you do that? Don't you know that if he becomes president, he's going to make me a slave again? Now, I had to come away as an adult with two things. Number one, was she lying? Or two, was that a real fear? And I think that was a concern of hers. I really do. I don't think she was just throwing words out. I think there was fear. But then we have to ask ourselves the question, why is there fear? Is that a realistic fear? Because, and you know, there's people burning down, you know,
5G masts.
5G masts. Okay, there's people that you know won't. If there's a coronavirus vaccine, they're not going to do it because evil Bill Gates is going to slip a chip in them, and then there's going to be constant. I mean, there's all these conspiracy theories, and we can laugh some of them off, but see, some people really, really believe them. And the people that I tend not to have patience for, it's not people who have been trapped in this. They're reading information and they believe something like this. The people that I have no patience for are the ones who have doctored videos, who have edited things to appear a certain way, to make politicians sound a certain way. I mean, they have the whole thing. And they edit it in such a way that they take away all of the context. They take away and edit away truth just so they can get people to think a certain way or hate a certain thing. And I'm like, mercy, that's
like, well, my first degree was in philosophy, and we call that bad faith. You know, where you're intentionally being like intellectually kind of like lying to yourself, almost being disingenuous.
Right.
And that's entirely, as you say, like you could meet someone with the worst, like most racist opinion ever, but if they're genuine in their conviction, wrong as it may be, you can respect that, can't you? As opposed to someone intentionally altering facts to make themselves look better.
Sure. I'm going to tell you something funny. So when this last presidential election that happened about 3-4 years ago, when Donald Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, I was one of those anybody but Donald Trump. I mean, I really was. And then, but then, because I'm just the sort of person that like I was telling you, if people tend to go a certain way, I'm going to start asking questions. I'm going to start looking in. And I found out that, you know, really there's a lot of, even though I didn't like the guy, but some of the accusations against him just weren't true. And I keep on telling people, look, that's not true. Please stop making me defend Donald Trump. I don't want to defend him. I don't like him. Stop making me defend him. I just want there to be truth. And that's the thing. When there's a intellectual dishonesty, when we're not, and you know what? Here's the truth. We have to be able to talk about some of the tough things. We have to be able to get reactions. You know, a few years ago, when there was really, you probably saw a lot of the news here, race issues in the United States. I was mentioning my daughter. You know, she's a mixed race, and she had never in her life faced racism. Never. I mean, at least as far as I know. You know, she's always been accepted. It's just always been the case. And yet, because of everything that was going on in the news, she got pulled over one time, and she was terrified that the police officer was going to shoot her. Not because she had ever had any problems, but because of the fever temperature of the perception of race was going on.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's just that totally what you're saying, but there's like an idea in psychology called like hypervigilance. So like it's your like perception of that threat. So like in a sense, you can make it real, like, and it's not any less terrifying than it was. It's kind of like those stereotypes of like take like, well, because we're chatting about race, like going for a job, for example,
Okay.
and the stats of if you're a person of color, you have a less chance of getting Z like promotion. If you go to the the interview process thinking, well, what if that person's racist? He's gonna mark me down because I'm black or green or whatever else. Then you've got that in your head, so you're naturally going to perform less ably than you would have if you didn't have that in your head. So like it doesn't matter whether it's created artificially. Sometimes the effect's the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
So nuts about it.
Yeah, I think America paid a really heavy price for keeping slavery. When the U.S. Constitution was written, there was actually some discussion and a belief with a lot of delegates that slavery just had to be gone. Slavery had to be removed. And the worry was that some of the southern states would not be part of the Union. And it was Benjamin Franklin that said this. He said, if we choose not to get rid of slavery now, we will get rid of it later, just at a higher price. And I think people fail to recognize that the price of the people that caused slavery in the United States, obviously white males. You can't escape that. People that got rid of slavery in the United States, white males. People that kept slavery in the United States, some of them were very religious. People that got rid of slavery in the United States, some of them were very, very religious. You just can't paint it, with one brush. It's impossible.
But whenever you've got quite a polarizing topic, it doesn't allow for nuance, does it? It's like I'm sorry guys, there's only two camps. You only get a choice of one. You can go an A or B. That's it.
Right.
So you say, yeah. So you kind of have to pick one. I mean, on the slavery topic though, I do think it's quite interesting. Like in some sense, it was abolished, but then which is a little bit weird. I'm not sure if you heard of them, but I'm watching this series on the Innocence Project. The ones that overturn incorrect convictions.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're making the point, obviously, because there's so many people of color incarcerated, that especially in some of the southern states, obviously because there's so many black people in the sort of prison industrial complex, that in many cases because they're essentially indentured servants while they're imprisoned. In a lot of cases, they work in the same cotton fields that they would have been during slavery, against their will, and you can't help but see some of the comparisons. A little bit, it's a little bit grim.
Yeah, I think again, that's one of the reasons why they stopped doing it. But one of the reasons why that happened was not slave labor, but prison labor, where they would get paid for it, very poor wages, but it just wasn't the black, it was the white also. And I think sometimes we forget that. I know when I one of the great things in Scripture is where we call Jesus the Lord Jesus, and the Lord means master. As a matter of fact, many times Paul in the Bible will call himself a servant or a slave of Jesus Christ. Now, our ideas of biblical slavery get really intermixed with what's happening in the South and things like that. And there's I have to be careful of every time I mention that we are to be servants of Christ, that I know that can hurt the certain racial groups. It can really hurt them because a certain stigma has been put in their heads. And should it be there? I don't know. But that doesn't matter. We know that it is there. And when things are there, we have to address it. I think, and again, I think that's why we have to have, open dialogue. Do you remember that Charlottesville thing that happened in the United States?
Yeah, with statues.
Yeah. I'll tell you what's really interesting is I did in my cases in controversy class, I studied those. And what's interesting is that a overwhelming majority of minorities in the South saw nothing wrong with it. But the clincher is that those statues absolutely were put up for racial domination purposes. I mean, they were foul, disgusting reasons. I mean, remember, the South was defeated. What defeated army still puts up, statues of their soldiers? Right? And what's interesting is even the South, an overwhelming majority, obviously not every person, obviously, but there's an overwhelming majority of people that see those statues and they actually do say that's part of our heritage. That's how it's accepted. When we talk about Southern hospitality, Southern pride, that means something. Some people, we'll talk about, trying to mix it up with slavery, but for your average person in the South, they don't see it that way. And again, another time I was telling people, stop making me defend Donald Trump. When people quote him saying that he said that there were good people on both sides, there were good racists, and there were good people on the other side too. And you have to think, number one, was Donald Trump saying there was good people in the KKK and also good people in Antifa? I mean, because those tend to be the two predominant groups. I don't think he was saying that. As a matter of fact, if you read his speech, he said that racism's horrible, but many people that came there because of the statues, wanting to keep it, want to get rid of it, and there's fine people on both of those sides of the issues, and that I think is something we've got to remember. To get rid of racism will never happen with a law. We have laws in this country, in England. You're not allowed to be a racist. You're not. But that doesn't stop it. It's changing the heart. It's changing perception. That happens with education. But you mentioned something, and you're spot on about it, that when people feel trapped, when people aren't understanding what's going on, they kind of have to find somebody to blame. In Germany in the early 1900s, you had to blame the Jews, and that picked up steam. Different groups.
There's always a need to other someone, isn't there? Like what is the target of racism shifts? Depending on the time and place. But I'm not sure as to how much of that is just socially constructed, or that's just ingrained within us. Like we need something to hate. I mean, I'm not sure. Like I want to believe that, to be honest.
I agree. I know. I agree. I agree. We're not born with it. I believe we have to literally be taught. I think we pick up on different things, and if we're just taught that people are people. Now, look, there's some really horrible people out there, but that's not determined by racial makeup or skin color or anything like that. And one thing that I'm really, really grateful for is that a majority of Americans are conscious of that, and um, they're fighting about it, and you have both groups. I mean, I think the KKK has something like, in all the United States, I think they have like a few hundred members.
Yeah, most of those sort of groups have been decreasing in size.
Yeah, I mean, there's hardly any, and that's a good thing. And it's a good thing that when there's injustice being done, we're not quiet about it. We don't sweep it under the rug, because that allows injustice to continue. But we've got to speak about it. We've got to be vocal about it. But we also have to understand, that's not the norm. That is something small. I mean, how many people are terrified of, in England, if somebody takes a picture and their kid's in it? They almost naturally assume everybody's a pedophile around them. Now, that's a weird thought. Now, again, like, we're trying to protect, and it's wise to protect, but we lose something when we begin to look at everybody with suspicion.
Yeah, I think there's always some individual or group that's there to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
That kind of weakness, I suppose, in us, in it, that kind of like moral panic. Because it's I suppose to a certain extent, like now, for example, how I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do, but where you have like a situation where there's a serious situation, terrorism or some type of like emergency, and then the populace give away their civil liberties. It's the same thing with America when you passed like the Patriot Act and whatnot. To all the name of a fear, but fear is like the enemy of reason, isn't it? It's
I think so. If you were to have a crowd of people just together, okay, nobody's ever met each other, a crowd of 1,000, people, not because they're bad people, but people will begin to congregate, probably first by somebody who looks like them, or talks like them, or dresses like them. And not because they're horrible people, but we're so desperate to find something that we can identify with. In the same way, when there's terrorism, to say that the people who did acts of terrorism on 9/11 were Muslim. Now, that's just a fact. But there's a fear of saying that, because, what else might that mean? And I think so many people won't be able to be rational and say, yes, those people are, but so many are not. Just because somebody is Muslim does not mean they're terrorists. I've some of the most friendly people I've ever met in my life in this country.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're trying to like describe something that's somewhat complicated, Damian, and we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
I can't be.
You're right.
That's all there is. That's all there is.
Well, see, honestly, this is one of the reasons why I'm willing to do a conversation like this with you, because we're able to speak about topics that are complex. People like the gotcha questions. Like Anton, have you stopped beating your partner?
Have I stopped?
Because just answer yes or no. Stop trying to explain yourself. Just answer yes or no. That is,
yes.
That's a question designed to, oh, yes, you did. So that means you've been beating her, right?
Yeah.
See, questions that are designed not to get to truth, but to entrap people is just so intellectually dishonest, and it grates on me. because once we are no longer able to speak even some tough ideas, we lose that freedom of speech. And by the way, freedom of speech wasn't designed because we all agree on something. You don't need to protect that. Freedom of speech was designed to protect the type of speech that no one agrees with, and that it rubs people the wrong way. And that's the type of speech that is truly protected. I'm not saying they're right, but I'll shout to the rooftops that they're dumb, that they're dumb, that they're wrong. But I'll also defend the right to say it.
Yeah, it's like that sort of deplatforming argument, isn't it? As in, like, their ideas are too controversial. I can't have them speaking to other people. I'm like, well, then you're deciding what's too controversial, and then how we escape the problem. I mean, you have to give that level of, I suppose, like, respect to people to let them engage with those ideas. By all means, engage with them as well, and try and convince them as to why they're being misled. But yeah, it's quite domineering, isn't it?
Yeah, I was in one of my uni courses, and there was a statement that was made by the professor. Everybody should have, everybody has the right to give their opinion. And I made a statement that said, that's true, but that doesn't mean everybody's opinion is valid. And I mean, everybody looked at me like, how dare you say that? I went, come on, do you really think that the person that says, all Jews should be burned, do you think that's a valid opinion?
Yeah, I acknowledge that you can have that in your head, but that's where it will stay.
but we need to be able to, without shouting the person down, be able to have some type of discussion. That's I was invited to be part of a debate about Christianity and Islam, and I declined the debate, not because of any positions, but I didn't feel like that would be a fruitful thing. I believe that it was just going to be one of arguments, not where there's going to be much thinking involved. It's going to be who has the best "I gotcha" statement.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really come across anyone, regardless of how offensive their opinion was, that I didn't want to ask them like another question. That I didn't think, okay, although on every level, I find that disgraceful, I have to know how you got there. Like, describe to me your intellectual journey, and that's the kind of thing that you need with things like race, because, as you say, that's why you have such strong dividing lines. If we're going to meet somewhere in the middle, then we need to be able to expose these ideas, without cost.
Yeah, there's a conservative group out there called Turning Point UK, and whether I agree with them or not, they've gone into some university platforms, and instead of being able to say, this is the reason why we think this is the best direction for the country, there's protesters in there that shout them down. And I'm like, at a university, we have just stopped the very thing that we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be hearing ideas, and we're supposed to, be able to discuss them, talk about them, challenge them. And but it's like we've lost what tolerance is. Tolerance can't be, I believe what you believe is right. That can't be tolerance. Tolerance, for me at least, is, I believe you're incredibly wrong on this. but let's talk about it. And you have the right to your opinion, and you shouldn't be hurt, abused, intimidated because of this opinion. Because what that happens, and we've talked about it, once somebody's interrogated, once somebody is intimidated, once somebody is just really attacked, that just makes it more ingrained.
Yeah, and they like double down, I find.
Yeah.
I find it just, it makes them, more stubborn, more offensive. And I mean, I do feel that, I suppose, in my short but fruitful time, that I've reached a couple people, but it's never been through like an aggressive encounter that way. It's been like really slowly, of a little friendly, questions of doubt. Like is that always the case? Or why do you think that is? Like, what about them over there? Does that apply to him as well? And then and they have to do that intellectual work themselves.
Yeah.
You can't just put it in there, and that's why I love going to LMU as well. Because like when I first started, because I came from a small town in North Wales, and I literally opened my eyes to views and stuff I'd never even encountered in my life. I remember like my first month, I was like debating with some sort of like hardcore Catholic about abortion or something. And I'm like, this is great. It's exactly where I want to be. This is amazing. I would never have come across these ideas before. But like,
well, you talk about, even with that abortion idea. I would say that there's, I would say you get kind of two groups. You get, and of course there's going to be more, but you basically get two groups. One that says life is sacred, you got to protect life, and the other one is we got to protect the rights of the mother. That it's her body, she gets to make the decision. And when's the last time you've actually seen a rational conversation like that, where two groups that are completely, and this is deep in the DNA now. We have great beliefs on these, but when can you discuss things like that? It's very difficult.
Yeah, no, it reaches such a point of like polarization that it can't be talked about like openly. So even though in a sense everyone's talking about it, they're also not talking about it.
Yeah. And that's the reason why the racism thing keeps on coming up, because personally, I don't find racism rampant in America. I honestly don't. I think that obviously there's groups of white people that just will not like somebody because they're black. That's given. And there's going to be groups of black people that aren't going to be liking somebody that they're white. In LA, you got groups of Koreans that don't like blacks or Latinos, and then vice versa. You always had that group. But in my growing up in the Deep South, in kind of a poor area, there really hasn't been a problem. Now people have. It's funny too. I'd go to a friend's house, and I'd, my friend would ask permission if I come in, and I'd hear the mom say, "Is that white boy?" Because it's me, and that wasn't offensive or anything like that. That's the closest thing, the fastest description. And
I wonder if you reverse that, if it'd still be okay.
Well, should it be? And there's the question there. I think it's okay, as long as, like you were saying, that we're not being derogatory. My son has a friend, and a couple of years ago, and he still had no teeth in his head. Didn't have a single tooth yet, and he was like 9, 10, and so I didn't know the kid's name. I just knew him as the kid that didn't have any teeth in his head. It was just the fastest description. And I think we can recognize that. I don't think we have to be so hypersensitive. I think it's amazing because I think Hollywood, movies, I think they're so duplicitous in that they scream no racism, no racism, no racism, and yet have you ever seen a Quentin Tarantino movie?
Yeah.
The N word is just used throughout it, and why? We again, we have to ask the question: if it's never okay, why is it okay?
Well, yeah, that's like a whole separate podcast right there, dude. That is right there. And like the kind of like enforcement / like policing of language is a very interesting one, but not one I could possibly cover within this time frame. Yeah, and in that in that small case, it is well, offense is the point, isn't it? It's said so much because it makes you feel something quite viscerally, which I imagine is exactly what he's trying to force you to feel.
Yeah.
Are you up for tackling the 2 questions that we got as well?
My friend, I'm in quarantine. I'm here all night. I have no plans.
All right, okay. So Suzanne's one's quite an interesting one. So she was talking about how America is one of the most like religious countries in the world, really.
Sure.
And yet it's in terms of its like social policies for like helping its most vulnerable. It also it does have huge problems there, and take like the homeless population, for example. That's just one area that has one of the largest populations of homeless people in the world, with a lot less support than some of the other countries, and like the healthcare system as well. I thought was quite an interesting point. It's just like for us, I suppose, for a country that kind of like prides itself on that kind of like moral authority in a way, I guess, of being good and upstanding, which is kind of tied in with the Christian, the way that the American image and American, it's all tied together.
Sure.
Yeah, and it does kind of link to race too, really. It's quite a good question.
So really, okay. So I really would not agree with any nation being called a Christian nation. Okay, we're called a Christian nation here because we have the Church of England and we don't deliver mail on Sundays. I mean, that makes us I mean, do you know what I'm saying? We would call ourselves a Christian nation. We have the cross in our flags. The United States, they call themselves a Christian nation, but again, I don't want to defend that because I think that's an impossibility. I think that you have Christians, but you don't have a Christian nation. And on one aspect, who are the ones that are doing so much of the work to help feed the homeless, to take care of them? Not the government, not even the government here, but you have so many people that are religious, that are involved in churches, that do this because they think it's the right thing to do to take care of people, to help feed them. And you will find overwhelmingly that the people that actually practice their Christianity, because you have so many people in England that will call themselves a Christian because they're white, and they're born in England. That's what makes me a Christian. What is it? Ozzy Osbourne, he said something like he was asked his religious affiliation, and he says, "Of course I'm a Christian. I just don't want to have anything to do with Jesus." And that kind of tends to be kind of people's idea that they're Christian in name, but their actions biblically would be different.
It's kind of like being kind of like, I'm not sure if it's the same like in America, but like you can be kind of like over here, like you can be like culturally Christian without necessarily,
right,
like buying into the Bible type of thing. I think that maybe that carries a lot of weight too, and those two get intertwined so much sometimes it's hard to pick them apart. And then on top of that, well, so you go on that one.
No, so going back to and let's actually stop. I'm going to remove the phrase Christian out of calling America, but let's just say if America feels they're so morally superior, okay, why do they allow these things to happen with the homeless? Why and not just the homeless, but the medical conditions and things like that. And there comes a different ethos, just a completely different cultural understanding. And I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, because I think it's cultural. Because what's one of the greatest complaints here about people that are on the dole, that they're always on the dole and they never get out of it, and their family's on the dole. And let's face it, if, and I'm not saying that's always the case at all, but I'm saying that if that is the case, we're doing something wrong there. If not working has somehow become more advantageous than being a productive person in society, we've missed it. We don't want anybody starving, and we understand that. But when just making sure nobody does without, I actually don't even know if that's a good idea for a culture, for people. I know there's a time in the in Thessalonians where there was a group of kind of haughty people, and they said, we believe so much that Jesus is going to come very, very soon that we've quit our jobs. And because we are so superior in our relationship with God, you guys need to start feeding us. So they've quit their jobs, and they're saying because of their religious superiority, those people that don't trust God enough to quit their jobs, they need to feed them. And that's where we get the famous verse where Paul says, look, a man that will not work should not eat. And that's actually, I think, a good thing overall, because it promotes the need to take care of, and the need to not just constantly take, but actually be a productive part. When you talk about homelessness, though, it's kind of interesting that if you actually take San Francisco, for example, and this is not a blanket statement, okay? Because we're going to find people that believe different. But there is a good amount of people in San Francisco that don't want homes. They want to be homeless. I mean, they actually want that. I don't get that. I'm sure there's some that don't. I'm sure families don't want, if I was homeless, I wouldn't want my family to be homeless or anything like that. But there are some people that do. There are some people with mental issues, drug addictions, and things like that have driven them to that. And I would say the breakdown is not because of a lack of the government, but the breakdown is a lack of the family. Because that really, I think, should be the point of contact. Because if my son had lost everything, and he was homeless, my advice for him would not be, all right, we'll contact, the local job center and make sure you get on the dole, make sure you get on universal credit and do this. It would be more hands-on. Come in, let's help take care of you. Let's get you back on your feet. Let's make sure you're doing things. And I'm not saying that people don't fall through the cracks, but I do know that overall, America, just like the United Kingdom, is a very giving society. And some of the people that fall through the cracks shouldn't. But there are some people that make some really, really poor decisions.
It's quite interesting how the two, because parliamentary research is looking at how America and the UK look at this problem of their vulnerables, I suppose, in a way, and the American one's quite interesting because in a way it's like you've got it's like a leftover, a remnant of the Puritan work ethic. It's really, it's working is it's your road to salvation. It's key. It's part of your core identity, and around that obviously is that family unit. So it kind of makes sense that you know, when we talk about like homeless people, you would say, you know, like family is kind of like, you know, is key there. I think that we look at it because like when we're talking about homeless, like you can see it as like a, you know, like an individual thing, or you can see it as like a structural thing. I think in the UK we tend to see it as more of a structural thing, whereas maybe in the US you tend to see it as, okay, what choices has that individual made that's led them to that kind of point. It's much more like on their own agency type thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite. I think that kind of maybe.
I've got a lot of my friends in Texas. I've got hundreds of them, and a lot of them are small business owners, and they honestly they are some of the most giving people to people that have absolutely nothing. Would say, you know, do you have a job? What, come over. We'll train you. We'll get this. We'll try to get you someplace to stay. And the compassion is there, but the reports are going to be worst case scenario that you hear about, because that's what the news wants. And I'm not saying the news is this, trying to uproot everything, but the news really tells us the worst. It doesn't tell us the best, and it gets the worst situations to shock us, and maybe for a good reason. But going back with ties as far as with the Bible is, we're also told in the Bible that when somebody comes in, make sure you in your crops, make sure when you harvest in a circle, not in a square, and you leave the edges. So when strangers would be foreign nationals come in, people that don't have jobs, they can come in and they can pick things off of the corners. And you would be considered the more generous person you were, the bigger the corners you'd leave. And as a matter of fact, there was even a rule that when you cut your wheat, when you cut your grain, that if anything falls, you're not allowed to pick it up. Just leave that for the next person and keep going. So there's actually a lot of rules to help people that just aren't able to. And and I know I can't speak for everybody. I can speak with the people that I come in contact with, and at least in my circles, they tend to be very, very compassionate. But like you said, America is very work driven. I mean, extremely. I mean, believe it or not, there's a lot of people that have 2 weeks. I mean, if you get a job that gives you 2 weeks paid vacation, you've really done well. That's not mandatory. Okay? It's not law. And if you get a job, I mean, you've done well. But even those people that get the 2 weeks paid vacation, a lot of them don't even take it. A lot of them don't take holidays because they're working. They're trying to build something. And, it is an absolute different culture. But like I said, I can only speak of my circles, and I do find my circles very, very compassionate on these things. And when you talk about medical, boy, that's tough, isn't it? You talk about, government-sponsored healthcare or private healthcare.
Yeah, well, it's tied to your employment, but that makes total sense. Considering what we just talked about, right?
Well, yeah, but look at some of the struggles we have that are public services really were hurt, and even some of our people on the front lines, they didn't have the masks, they didn't have everything that you need. And it tends to be in the private sector in America, they tend to have what they need, but you do pay for it, and there's no doubt about that. Is it right that you pay for it? I think so. And this is going to be very, very controversial. I don't know if everybody has the right to live to be 120. I think that
I'm not sure I'd want to live to 120.
I agree, but I think again in America, you're allowed to make decisions that affect you, and you can play the odds. It's kind of like car insurance, you know. You have car insurance. You have, well, actually, everybody has to have car insurance. Let's say house insurance. You have house insurance just in case something bad happens. But if you don't get it and a catastrophe happens, well, you played the odds, and it's very sad, and hopefully your neighbors will help you. But that was kind of your decision, and there's a responsibility there. Yeah, I remember there was a video that went about with the cost of an ambulance in America. Did you ever see that video? That it was like thousands of dollars, and people were shocked. And yet, you know, what do you get with that? You get a lot of ambulances at the ready because it is a business. And when you call, you expect service immediately, no waiting. Surgery, you know, no waiting. Here, it's a trade-off. I mean, if there's an emergency, you know, how long would you expect an ambulance to take?
Well, are we talking post or pre-COVID?
See, I mean, you know that, but those are the things we deal with, and it's these aren't easy decisions, and I don't think somebody is callous. You know, I'll give you a very true story that happened, okay? And by the way, I'm grateful for the NHS here. They have always taken great care of me and my family, and I love them, okay? There's nothing against them, but they are tied, you know, financially, they are tied. We had a friend who was diagnosed with a form of leukemia, and she was told that it was terminal, and she was given medication here in the UK. And so she had relatives in America that she wanted to go say goodbye to. And while she was in America, she had an episode, and she had to go to the emergency room. And she was asked if she's on any medications, and she said, you know, she gave the painkillers, and they said, why? And the answer was, because I have terminal cancer. Oh, really? What is the cancer? And when she told them the cancer, the doctor says, no, that's treatable. We can take care of that. And one of the things that we don't understand here, and yes, there are people that fall through the cracks in America, and I'm not trying to wave the U.S. flag again. You know, stop making me try to defend America, okay? You know,
guys have waved that flag enough.
Yeah, but this person was unemployed. She had nothing. She didn't have the money for treatments, and so she went on government health care in the United States, and she still got top of the line care, and she didn't pay anything. So we see things that are going on, and we see the people that are falling through the cracks, and I don't think anybody should fall through the cracks, but it really is not as bad as what people make it out. But one person falling through the crack is pretty bad.
Yeah, and it is harder for us white males to see it when we're already in the good position to start with. Sure, I've got one question left, so I saved the easiest one for last.
Should I duck?
No. Has Christianity condoned slavery from Mecca? Yeah,
okay.
I think you saw that one already.
That's a great discussion. So let's talk about slavery in the Bible. Let's just talk about what it is. In the Old Testament, in the ancient world, you became a slave because you were conquered, okay? Or you became a slave because you couldn't pay your debts.
Yeah, spoils of war and whatnot.
Right. In Israel, if you could not pay your debts, you had to work them off. You were a slave, okay? This didn't mean you had to whip across your back or anything like that. As a matter of fact, the treatment of slave, you were commanded to treat them really good. And God said, because you guys were slaves too in Egypt, so you better treat them better than you were treated. And even if you lost everything that you had on the year of Jubilee every 25 years, all that was given back to you. I don't know if you knew that, but you could never permanently lose your land. And let's say you got into deep debt and you became a slave, but the year of Jubilee was in 2 weeks. You were a slave for those 2 weeks. You were a servant. You were working off your debt. But at the end of those 2 weeks, all debts were forgiven. So it was a very different situation. Of course, there were people who got into heavy debt and died, and therefore their families had to work off this debt. But here is something interesting, that if the debt, once the debt was paid off, there was kind of an interesting caveat that the person who was the slave, because while they're your slave, you have to take care of them, you have to treat them good. You cannot abuse them, physically or sexually. You can't. And if this slave really liked the way you treated them, they would say, I want to be your servant forever. Okay? And they would put, yeah, I know that's strange, isn't it? And they would put their ear on the doorpost, and it would be pierced with a gold ring. And that person was willingly a servant now forever, and that person, the master, now had to take care of that slave in a good manner forever. And if the master died without having any sons, that slave got everything. Okay, so that's kind of the Hebrew slavery. I'm not saying it was great, wonderful. I'm just saying what it was and why it was. Okay, could there have been abuses? Yes, but that would have been against the law. All right. Now, when we get to the New Testament, so slavery is never stopped in the Old Testament. When we get into the New Testament, we get to the same thing where slavery is actually not directly spoken against, but there's a term called men stealers, which are people that would steal away people and then make them into slaves. That was condemned in the scripture. We have a book in the Bible called Philemon that was about a runaway slave called Onesimus. And running away in the Roman Empire, you know, that's a death penalty. Okay. It could be less, but it was still a death penalty. If there was a slave revolt, there was a point in the Roman Empire that they would kill all the slaves on that property as a lesson to everybody else. So on the Apostle Paul's journey, he met this guy named Onesimus and found out that he was a slave of a friend of his named Philemon. And again, I just have to be honest with you, slavery is not discredited, but it's also very different than what we hear of in the last couple hundred years. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that Paul kind of respected the law, but he told Philemon, he said, listen, he's not just your slave, he's your brother. And you cannot mistreat him. And as a matter of fact, Paul says, I know he stole stuff from you, so if he owes you anything, I'll pay for it. don't take it out on him. I'll pay for it. And so there that's an interesting idea. And I'll get to slavery in America because of that. But, you know, there's some things that are very, very misunderstood in the Bible. It's kind of like, people saying, the Bible treats women like they're just property. But actually, the exact opposite was happening, especially in the New Testament, because Paul was being attacked because he was telling the women, look, you don't have a lesser spot before God because you're a female. There's neither male nor female. We're all the same in front of God, and that was revolutionary.
Oh, I thought their husband was their conduit to God. Or was that not true?
No, but no, definitely not their conduit to God. As a matter of fact, there's a warning to husbands that they better have a good relationship with their wives, or the husband's prayers will be hindered. Now, again, I'd be dishonest if I didn't say that the Bible says that in the marriage capacity, the husband has the most responsibility, and therefore he has the most
Power.
Power may not be the right thing, because I'll be honest with you, you couldn't beat your wife or anything like that. And if let's say my wife, in our household, my wife lets me, be the boss. She lets me, okay? And I could, put my foot down and say, woman, this is what we're doing. And she'll go along with it too, I'll be honest with you. But she knows how to make my life pretty miserable after that. So, so there's some things there. But when you talk then about slavery that came to the United States, and this really is Dutch slavery. I mean, I don't know how the Dutch just get a free pass on this, because they're the ones that started this Black African slavery. Fact.
Yeah. I will give. There were a lot of like colonial powers enjoying that franchise at the time. I will give you that.
Yeah. And also, that part of the contract, and yes, they did kidnap him, but part of the contract was they would go to certain tribes and say, look, I know you really don't like these people, and why don't you go attack them, and instead of killing them all, bring them over here and we'll buy them off of you. Okay, that's a fact. We know this. So this type of Dutch type of slavery became very profitable in the English colonies in America, on the sugar plantations and whatnot. But that type of slavery was never even suggested that it was okay, because that type of slavery was a slavery in which you were imprisoned for the rest of your life based upon race. That was never in the scripture.
So you're saying it was never justified from a Christian point of view.
That type of slavery. What now? When you say from the Christian standpoint, or then we have to define on who the Christian is, because again, there would be some people that would, in the South, that would defend their right to have these slaves, and they would use the Old Testament examples of slavery. And I'll say, okay, that would stand if they treated it like Old Testament slavery, but they didn't. And again, remember, it was the white people of the North that caused the end of slavery. They gave up a lot of lives. Some of the most brutal fighting in world history was in the American Civil War over slavery, where white people were fighting white people to free the African slave. And so people used the Bible to I won't even say use, I'll say they abused.
Yeah, I mean, as an atheist myself, I must admit, like it's kind of like it's a tool, that can be interpreted like any which way, isn't it? Like dependent upon your worldview, really.
I think, one of the things that I teach at our church is context. Context is important because, there's a verse in the Bible that says, let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Man, that sounds like a great Bible verse to live off of. Yeah, but the context says, the context is, if there is no God, if there is no eternity, then we might as well do that. But because there is, we need to live a different life. And so if you rip one verse out, yeah, I mean, you can, I can do it, with almost any document. I can do that. But that's context is key. And that's why I teach my church. I said, listen, if I preach something and you're not sure about it, I want you to read the passage, go before it, go after it, make sure it's in context, make sure we understand the culture of the time, make sure that you're not just believing the words that are coming out of my mouth, because, I mean, what if I'm lying to you? I'm not, but what if I am? You need to be able to search the scripture, not based upon how you feel or how do I like this verse to appear, but as a, if you will, as a historical document. That you have to look at it as a historical document. Who were the people that they were talking to? What was the reasoning behind it? What was the purpose of it? And I think we become dishonest when we don't treat it like a historical document.
Yeah, I don't, blame all of Christianity for slavery. Just so you know.
Well, no, but that's a fair question to be asked, because it is asked. It's one of the stones that's thrown out of it.
Yeah,
and
but it was just a tool they had at the time. Like, depending where they were put, or where this horrible, enslavement of people occurred, they would have justified it on some sort of ground. So it wouldn't have happened. And evil men will always find a way to interpret things in that
That's
way.
true. By the way, I really like the idea that if you're in debt, you got to work it off. And I really like it more, the idea that, like, if people destroy public property, let them work it off. Instead of the taxpayer having to cover it. There's some good things with it. Of course, there's abuses, and of course there's other things. But if I want to use another religious book and say anybody of this religion is evil, because I'm going to twist and malign the things that are more reprehensible to me, and because I somebody said, why does the Bible approve of sex slavery? And never did, but there are times in which it mentions certain things have happened. And those are always very low-key moments in the scripture, or maybe low-key is not the right word. Maybe those are very low points where the hero does something very wicked and very horrible, or the heroine is abused. And it's always demonstrated that these things are not good. Just because there's record of it. Again, I try to look at the Bible as a historical document. And just because it makes record of it doesn't necessarily mean it's cheering for it.
No. It's interesting that you kind of like see it that way. I do always wonder whether it's like interpreted literally, or whether it's just kind of, I suppose, metaphor and kind of like more kind of like moral type to like live your life, as opposed to an exact record. Yeah. But I'm just conscious both of your time and how much I can upload to YouTube.
Okay.
It will go. But yeah, I'll stop it there and we can carry on chatting afterwards. But I just want to say thanks for appearing on it. I think we've solved the problem of racism.
Oh, sweet.
I think it's
all done.
Yeah. Hey,
Anton, seriously, thank you so much for letting me be on. Again, these aren't the easiest of topics, but I personally appreciate being able to talk through these things.
No problem. I really enjoyed it. So thanks very much.